Gentlemen, who wants to die first?
In the West, a smile can be deadlier than a bullet, and some women wore both like a second skin. The dust hung thick in the Montana Territory air as three riders crested the ridge, their shadows stretching long across the prairie grass. Sarah Mitchell stood beside her wagon, one hand resting on the Winchester rifle propped against the wheel, the other shading her eyes from the afternoon sun. She'd been expecting company, the wrong kind. Her husband Thomas stood close, his own rifle ready but his hands trembling slightly. He was a clerk from Philadelphia, good with numbers, terrible with violence. That's why Sarah had learned to shoot straight at 12 years old, back when her father ran a trading post on the Powder River. The riders came slow and deliberate. She recognized the type. Drifters with hard eyes and empty pockets, men who saw a lone wagon and thought easy pickings. They hadn't counted on what they'd find. As they drew closer, Sarah could see their hands hovering near their holsters, that predatory confidence in their posture. The leader, a bearded man with a torn cavalry jacket, grinned wide as he reined in his horse 20 yards out. "Well now," he called out, tobacco-stained teeth showing. "What do we have here? Lady traveling awful lonely out here." Sarah's lips curved into a smile that never reached her eyes. Her fingers wrapped around the Winchester's stock, thumb finding the hammer with practiced ease. "Gentlemen," she said, voice steady as stone, "who wants to die first?" Bang! The grin faltered on the bearded man's face. His companions, younger men with nervous energy, exchanged uncertain glances. They'd expected tears, maybe pleading. Not this cold certainty. "That's mighty bold talk for a woman," the leader said, but his voice had lost its swagger. His hand had stopped its drift toward his gun. Sarah took 3 steps forward, away from the wagon, Winchester now cradled across her chest. The movement was deliberate, drawing their attention solely to her. Thomas understood and edged backward toward the wagon bed, where their Sharp's rifle lay hidden under canvas. "Bold is thinking 3 men can rob Sarah Mitchell and ride away to spend the money," she replied. The use of her own name hung in the air like a challenge. "I'm guessing you boys aren't from around here, or you'd know better." The youngest rider, barely 20 with peach fuzz on his chin, actually paled. "Mitchell, as in—" "Shut up, Billy," the leader snapped. But doubt had crept into his eyes now. He'd heard stories, everyone had. The woman who'd held off Sioux raiders for 2 days at the Bozeman Crossing. The same woman who'd tracked 3 horse thieves across 200 miles of wilderness and brought them back alive. Barely. "I'll give you boys one chance," Sarah continued, her voice carrying across the prairie wind. "Turn those horses around and ride. You'll live to see tomorrow. Stay, and I promise your mothers will be sewing your names into blankets they'll never need again." The third man, silent until now, spat tobacco juice and laughed. 3 against 2, lady. I'll take them odds." Sarah's smile widened. 3 against 2? You can't count very well, can you? The metallic click of hammers being pulled back echoed from the tree line to their left, then from the rocks to their right. The riders' horses stamped nervously, sensing the shift in their master's confidence. "That makes 3 against 7, Sarah said calmly. "I've got 4 ranch hands who were supposed to meet us here an hour ago. They've been watching this whole time, waiting to see if you'd be smart or stupid." It was a bluff. Complete fabrication. But Sarah had learned long ago that in the West, confidence and a good poker face could be worth more than actual bullets. The bearded leader's jaw worked, grinding his teeth. His eyes scanned the tree line, the rocks, finding nothing but seeing phantoms in every shadow. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool autumn air. "Your choice, gentlemen," Sarah said softly. "But choose quick. My finger's getting tired, and when I get tired, I get twitchy." The young one called Billy made the decision for them. He yanked his horse's reins hard, spinning the animal around. "I ain't dying for no wagon," he muttered, kicking his mount into a gallop back the way they'd come. "But before you find out what happens next, if you're enjoying the story, hit that like button. And if you're not subscribed yet, make sure to join us. Comment what country you're listening from. I love seeing how these Wild West stories travel the world. Now stay with me till the end, because what's coming will surprise you. The departure of the youngest rider broke the standoff's tension like a snapped wire. The tobacco-spitting man cursed, but he too began backing his horse away, eyes still fixed on the tree line where imaginary rifles aimed at his chest. The bearded leader held his ground for another heartbeat, pride warring with survival instinct. Sarah never blinked, never lowered her rifle. She'd learned this game from her father. The first person to show weakness loses everything. "This ain't over," he finally growled, turning his horse with deliberate slowness, trying to salvage some scrap of dignity. "Yes, it is," Sarah called after him, "and if I see any of you three within 50 miles of here again, there won't be talking next time." She held her position until the riders disappeared over the ridge, dust trail marking their retreat. Only then did she lower the Winchester, letting out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Thomas emerged from behind the wagon, face pale. "Sarah, there's nobody in those trees." "I know." "You bluffed 3 armed men with nothing but words." She turned to him with a tired smile. "Words and the reputation that came before them. That's the thing about the West, Thomas. Sometimes the story of what you've done is more powerful than what you can actually do." He shook his head in amazement, then suddenly laughed, a release of pent-up fear. "You're absolutely terrifying, you know that?" "That's why you married me," she replied, checking the wagon's contents to ensure nothing had been disturbed during the confrontation. "Someone had to keep you alive out here." Thomas had come west with dreams of starting a freight business, connecting the mining camps to the railroad towns. He had the business sense, the contracts, and the determination. What he didn't have was the frontier ruthlessness necessary to survive the journey. That's where Sarah came in. They'd met in Fort Benton 3 years ago, when Thomas had tried to negotiate a supply route through Blackfoot territory without understanding he was being set up by rival freight runners. Sarah, delivering furs with her father, had overheard the conversation and intervened. She'd saved him from losing his stake, his supplies, and possibly his life. 6 months later, they were married, an unusual partnership, the educated Easterner with his ledgers and calculations, and the frontier woman who could read trail sign better than most men could read books. "We should move," Sarah said, climbing onto the wagon seat. "Those 3 might get brave again once they realize there's no ambush waiting." Thomas settled beside her, taking up the reins. "How far to the crossing?" 10 miles. We'll make it before dark if we push." She kept the Winchester across her lap, eyes scanning the horizon. In the west, trouble rarely announced itself just once. The wagon rolled through prairie grass that bent and swayed like ocean waves, wheels creaking a steady rhythm. Sarah maintained her vigil, watching for dust clouds or the glint of sun on metal that might signal the rider's return. "Tell me about your father," Thomas said quietly, breaking the comfortable silence. He knew the basics, but sensed she needed to talk, to come down from the dangerous edge she'd been walking. Sarah was quiet for a moment, memories flooding back. "Daniel Mitchell came west in '49 with the gold rush. Didn't find much gold, but he found something better. A place where a man could make his own rules, live by his own code. He married a Crow woman, my mother running deer. She taught me to track, to move quiet through the wilderness. He taught me to shoot and to never back down when you're in the right. Where are they now? Gone. Cholera took mother when I was 15. Father died 2 winters ago, pneumonia. I ran the trading post alone for a year before meeting you." She glanced at him. "Some folks thought I was crazy, choosing a city man over the ranch hands and trappers who came calling." Thomas smiled. "And what do you think now?" "I think those ranch hands and trappers would have wanted a wife who cooked and cleaned and kept quiet. You wanted a partner." She nudged him with her shoulder. "Though I'm starting to think you just married me for protection." "Can it be both?" They shared a laugh, the tension of the confrontation finally easing. But Sarah's eyes never stopped scanning. That's what separated the living from the dead in this territory. Constant vigilance. As the sun began its descent toward the mountain peaks, painting the sky in shades of amber and crimson, they spotted smoke rising in the distance. The crossing was ahead, a small settlement that had sprung up where 3 trails intersected. It wasn't much. A trading post, a blacksmith, a boarding house, and a stable. But it represented safety for the night. "Think they'll have room?" Thomas asked. "Mrs. Henderson always has room for us. I helped deliver her daughter last spring." Sarah shifted the rifle. "We'll get a hot meal, rest the horses, and push on to Silver Creek tomorrow." But as they drew closer to the settlement, Sarah noticed something wrong. The smoke was too thick, too dark, not the lazy drift from cooking fires, but the black billow of serious burning. "Thomas, stop the wagon." He pulled the reins immediately, trusting her instinct. They both stared at the smoke column rising against the darkening sky. "That's not normal," she said quietly. "Could be they're clearing brush, burning off in October, with winter coming." Sarah stood up in the wagon, shading her eyes. "Something's wrong. Very wrong." They approached the crossing slowly, Sarah now standing in the wagon bed, rifle ready. The settlement came into view around a bend in the creek, and what they saw made Thomas pull the horses to a complete stop. The trading post was burning, flames licking through the roof, black smoke pouring into the twilight sky. The stable door hung open, broken off one hinge, and there in the center of the small settlement were the 3 riders they'd encountered earlier, plus 4 more men, 7 in total, all armed, all standing around watching the trading post burn. "Oh, God," Thomas whispered. "We led them here." Sarah's jaw clenched. He was right. The riders must have circled around, realized the crossing was her likely destination, and decided if they couldn't rob her on the road, they'd hit the settlement instead. It was territorial logic. If you can't have something, destroy it. But there was something else, too. Near the boarding house, she could see figures huddled together. Mrs. Henderson, her daughter Emma, old Tom who ran the stable, and 3 others. Hostages. "We have to go get help," Thomas said, already starting to turn the horses. "Fort Ellis is 30 miles. Those people don't have 30 miles worth of time." Sarah's voice was flat, calculating. She was doing the math that mattered out here, the arithmetic of survival and sacrifice. "Sarah, there's 7 of them. 7, we can't—" "I can." She began checking her rifle, counting ammunition. 12 rounds in the Winchester, 6 in the revolver on her hip, another box of 50 cartridges in the wagon bed. "You're going to take the wagon and circle around to the north. There's a gully that runs behind the boarding house. Get those people out while I keep the attention on me." "That's suicide." She looked at him then, and he saw something in her eyes that made him understand why those riders had backed down earlier. Not anger, not fear. Just absolute certainty about what needed to be done. "Emma Henderson is 8 years old, Thomas. Her mother delivered our supplies through 2 winters when we had nothing. Tom taught me to gentle horses when I was 12. These are our people." She handed him the Sharps rifle. "You don't have to fight, but you do have to save them. Can you do that?" Thomas took the rifle with shaking hands. He'd never fired at another human being, never wanted to. But he'd also never seen Sarah like this, transformed from his wife into something harder, something forged by the frontier into a weapon of necessity. "What if they shoot you?" "Then you make sure Emma grows up knowing her mother didn't die alone." Sarah climbed down from the wagon. "Give me 10 minutes, then move. Fast and quiet." She started walking toward the burning settlement before he could argue further, rifle at her side, each step deliberate. Sarah approached from the east, using the creek bed for cover, moving with the silent grace her mother had taught her. The Crow people knew how to become part of the landscape, to move like wind through grass. She'd learned those lessons well. At 50 yards, she could see the situation clearly. The bearded leader from earlier was there, along with his 2 companions and 4 others, older men with the hard look of experienced outlaws. They'd positioned themselves around a fire pit in the center of the settlement, passing a bottle, celebrating their destruction. Mrs. Henderson and the others sat near the boarding house steps, hands visible, one of the outlaws standing guard with a shotgun. He was young, nervous, which made him the most dangerous. Nervous men pulled triggers accidentally. Sarah counted again. 7 men, total. 2 by the fire, 1 on the boarding house porch with the hostages, 2 checking the stable for anything valuable, and 2 more looting the burning trading post despite the heat and danger. They'd grown comfortable, confident. That was her advantage. She settled behind a water trough, resting the Winchester's barrel on the wooden edge. The range was about 40 yards, easy shooting for her. She'd hit targets twice that distance while her father timed her with his pocket watch. But killing wasn't like target practice. Once she fired the first shot, everything would explode into chaos. She needed a plan, needed to create enough confusion that Thomas could get the hostages clear. The bearded leader stood up, stretching, and walked toward the boarding house. He said something to Mrs. Henderson that Sarah couldn't hear, but she saw the woman flinch. That decided things. Sarah raised the Winchester, found him in her sights, then shifted her aim slightly right. She exhaled slowly, squeezed the trigger. Bang! The shot shattered the bottle in the bearded man's hand, spraying whiskey across his chest. He dove for cover, shouting in surprise and pain as glass fragments cut his palm. "Next one goes through your skull!" Sarah's voice rang across the settlement. "Everyone else, drop your weapons or I start putting holes in people." The camp erupted. Men scrambled for cover, drawing guns, shouting questions. But in the confusion, Sarah saw what she needed to see. Mrs. Henderson grabbed Emma and ran, heading for the gully where Thomas waited with the wagon. The other hostages scattered in different directions, taking advantage of the chaos. The young guard on the porch raised his shotgun toward the fleeing hostages. Sarah shifted her aim. Bang! Her second shot hit the porch railing inches from his hand. He yelped and dropped the shotgun, diving inside the boarding house. "I've got 17 more rounds!" Sarah shouted, working the Winchester's lever action, ejecting the spent brass. "And I don't miss! Who wants to test that?" Return fire came immediately, bullets kicking up dirt around her position. Sarah rolled left as bullets splintered the water trough, splashing water across the ground. She came up behind a wagon wheel, returning fire toward the muzzle flashes. One of the men near the stable cried out, grabbing his shoulder and stumbling back into cover. She'd hit him, but not fatally. That was fine. Wounded men scared their companions more than dead ones. "You're trapped, lady," the bearded leader shouted from behind the fire pit. "No way out. Give up now. Maybe we'll let you live." Sarah didn't waste breath responding. She was counting positions, tracking movements. 3 men had decent cover behind the fire pit and scattered equipment. 2 were in the stable. 2 inside the boarding house, including the nervous young guard. Her real goal wasn't to fight them all. It was to pin them down long enough for Thomas to get the hostages clear. She checked her pocket watch, a gift from her father. 7 minutes had passed since she'd fired the first shot. She needed to hold 3 more minutes. A figure darted from the stable toward the boarding house. Sarah tracked him, fired. The shot went high, exactly as she intended, forcing him to throw himself flat in the dirt rather than complete his movement. She was hurting them, boxing them in. "You can't win this!" another voice shouted. "There's 7 of us!" 6.5, Sarah called back, allowing herself a grim smile. "That shoulder wound's going to slow your friend down." More shots came her way, but they were panic fire, not aimed. Men shooting to make noise rather than hit anything. She'd seen it before. When people lost control of a situation, they tried to take it back with volume instead of precision. But then the bearded leader did something smart. He sent 2 men crawling through the tall grass on her flanks, trying to get angles on her position. She saw the grass moving, tracked the approach. She could shoot them. Clean shots. But that meant killing. And despite everything, despite the burning building and the terrorized hostages, Sarah still hesitated at that final line. Her father had taught her to shoot. Her mother had taught her when not to. The choice was taken from her when one of the flanking men rose up 15 yards to her right, rifle aimed at her chest. "Got you now!" The Sharp's rifle's distinctive boom cut him off. The heavy-caliber round hit him in the leg, spinning him around and dropping him like a felled tree. He screamed, clutching his thigh as blood poured through his fingers. Thomas. Her city-raised, number-calculating husband had just shot a man from 70 yards away with a rifle he'd probably fired twice in his life. "The hostages are clear," Thomas's voice carried across the settlement. "Sarah, fall back." But the bearded leader had heard it too, and now he knew exactly where Thomas was positioned. Sarah saw the leader's head snap toward Thomas's position, saw him gesture to two of his men. They began moving toward the gully, using the boarding house for cover. Not happening. Not today. She stood up fully, stepping away from the wagon wheel into clear view, and fired 3 rapid shots toward the boarding house. The bullets punched through wooden siding, forcing the men to dive for better cover. "Your fight's with me!" she shouted, walking forward now, lever action working like clockwork, each shot precise and deliberate. She was giving them a target they couldn't ignore. Herself. "Come on! I'm right here!" The bearded leader took the bait, raising up to return fire. His shot went wide. Sarah's didn't. She aimed for his cover, not for him, splintering the barrel he hid behind, showering him with wood fragments. But her boldness cost her. The man in the stable had a clear angle now. His rifle cracked, and Sarah felt a hot lance of pain tear across her upper left arm. The impact spun her, made her stumble. Blood bloomed through her sleeve. She went down on one knee, switching the Winchester to her right hand only, grimacing against the burning pain. Flesh wound, she assessed quickly. Hurt like hell, but nothing vital hit. She could still fight. "Sarah!" Thomas's voice anguished. "Stay with the hostages," she commanded, forcing herself back to her feet. The movement sent fresh pain racing down her arm, but she'd learned long ago that pain was just information. Information you could choose to ignore. The wound changed things, though. The outlaws saw her stumble, saw the blood. Their fire intensified, emboldened by the sight of her injury. Bullets kicked up dirt around her feet. She retreated, using the wagon for cover again, trying to think through the pain and adrenaline. 10 rounds left in the Winchester, 6 in her revolver. She was bleeding, outnumbered, and running out of time. The fire from the trading post was spreading now, catching on the boarding house roof. Soon the whole settlement would be ablaze. She needed to end this, needed to break their will to fight before she lost too much blood to stay effective. "You boys having fun yet?" she called out, pressing her back against the wagon, using her bandana to tie off the wound one-handed. "Because I've got all night. And when the cavalry patrol comes through in the morning, they're going to find a whole lot of dead outlaws and one very alive witness." It was another bluff. No patrol was scheduled. But doubt was a weapon, too. "You're bleeding out, lady," the bearded leader shouted back. "Just a matter of time." "Then come finish it," Sarah challenged. "Unless you're afraid one wounded woman is more than 7 men can handle." The taunt worked. She heard boots on dirt, heard the leader shouting orders. They were coming. Sarah counted footsteps, tracking their approach by sound. 3 men moving in coordinated advance, using cover properly. These weren't amateur road bandits anymore. They were fighting like soldiers. Somebody had military training. She checked the Winchester again. 10 rounds. Had to make them count. The first man appeared around the wagon's rear, rifle raised. Sarah was faster. She fired from the hip, an old trick her father taught her. The shot took him in the shoulder, punching him backward. He wasn't dead, but he was out of the fight, writhing on the ground. Return fire came immediately from 2 angles. Sarah dropped flat, rolling under the wagon as bullets perforated the space where she'd been standing. Wood splinters rained down. A wheel spoke cracked and broke. From beneath the wagon, she could see boots and legs. She fired twice more, aiming low. 1 shot missed. The second hit someone's ankle. Screaming followed, then cursing. But then hands grabbed her legs, yanking hard. The nervous young guard from the boarding house had crawled around the other side, catching her vulnerable. She tried to twist, to bring the rifle around, but he dragged her clear of the wagon into open ground. "I got her!" he shouted, trying to pin her down. Sarah drove her elbow up into his face, felt his nose break, felt hot blood spray across her hand. He loosened his grip just enough. She rolled free, coming up with her revolver drawn, thumb cocking the hammer. They stared at each other, 6 feet apart. He was reaching for his own gun, eyes wide with fear and adrenaline. Just a kid, really. Maybe 19. Somebody's son. Somebody who'd made bad choices and ended up here in this moment, facing a wounded woman who knew how to kill. "Don't," Sarah said quietly. "Please don't make me." His hand froze on his gun grip. Blood poured from his broken nose, dripping onto his shirt. She could see him calculating odds, weighing pride against survival. "Walk away," she continued, revolver steady despite the pain in her arm. "Just turn around and walk away. This isn't your fight, is it? You're riding with these men because you needed money, because you made a mistake. But you don't have to die for someone else's vendetta." For a moment, she thought he might actually do it, might actually choose life. Then the bearded leader appeared behind him, shotgun raised toward Sarah's chest. "Kid, move!" The young guard stood frozen between them. "I said move!" The leader's finger tightened on the trigger. The Sharp's rifle boomed again from the gully. The shot hit the leader's shotgun, tearing it from his hands in a shower of splinters and bent metal. The force spun him around, left him clutching a hand that was probably broken. Thomas had saved her life twice now. Her educated city man, who'd never wanted violence, who'd come west dreaming of freight routes and profit margins, had become a warrior when the woman he loved needed him. The young guard made his choice in that moment of chaos. He ran, stumbling over his own feet in his haste to flee, disappearing into the darkness beyond the burning buildings. Sarah didn't shoot him. Some part of her, the part her mother had nurtured, the part that still believed in mercy, let him go. The bearded leader wasn't done. Despite his shattered hand, despite the odds turning against him, he pulled a revolver with his left hand, rage overwhelming reason. "You've cost me everything," he roared, swinging the gun toward her. Sarah fired first. Her bullet took him in the chest, center mass, exactly where her father had taught her to aim when there was no other choice. He staggered, looked down at the spreading bloodstain with something like surprise, then collapsed backward into the dirt. The settlement went silent except for the crackle of flames and the moaning of wounded men. "It's over!" Sarah shouted, her voice hoarse from smoke and exertion. "Anyone still willing to fight? Because I'm still standing and I'm done being merciful." No response came. The remaining outlaws, those who could still move, were melting away into the darkness, abandoning their wounded companions, their loot, their dead leader. The fight had gone out of them the moment they'd seen their boss fall. Sarah stood in the firelight, revolver still raised, blood running down her arm, watching the shadows until she was certain no more threats remained. Only then did she let herself feel it. The pain, the exhaustion, the weight of what she'd been forced to do. She'd killed a man, not in defense of herself, but in defense of others. The morality was clear, the necessity absolute. But that didn't make her hands stop shaking when she finally lowered the gun. Thomas emerged from the gully, Sharp's rifle still in his hands, face pale in the firelight. Behind him came Mrs. Henderson carrying Emma, old Tom limping but alive, the others following. "Sarah," Thomas started, but she raised a hand to stop him. "Get water on these fires before the whole settlement burns. Check the wounded. Tie up anyone who can't walk. Send Tom to Fort Ellis for the marshal." She holstered her revolver, suddenly feeling every year of her life and several she hadn't lived yet. "I'll be at the creek." She walked away before anyone could argue, before anyone could see the tears starting to form. She'd done what was necessary. She'd saved lives. But the cost of that salvation sat heavy on her soul, and she needed a moment in the darkness to carry that weight alone. Behind her, Thomas gave quiet orders. organizing the survivors, taking charge in his own way. The city man and the frontier woman, different paths to the same strength. The West had tested them both tonight. They'd passed, but the price of that passing would linger long after the fires burned out. Sarah knelt beside the creek, washing blood from her hands and arm. The water ran red, then pink, then clear as she worked. The wound was shallow, a groove across her bicep that would scar but heal. She'd been lucky. A few inches lower or higher, and the bullet might have shattered bone or severed an artery. Footsteps approached behind her. She tensed, hand moving toward her revolver, then relaxed when she recognized Thomas's careful, civilized gait. "Mrs. Henderson wants to tend your wound," he said quietly, sitting on a rock beside her. "She says you're being stubborn. Mrs. Henderson's raised 8 children. She thinks everyone needs mothering." But Sarah's voice was soft, without its usual edge. They sat in silence for a moment, listening to the creek flow, the distant shouts of people fighting fires, the occasional moan of wounded men waiting for the marshal. "I killed a man tonight," Thomas said finally. "Shot him. I can still feel the rifle's kick, still see him fall. You saved my life. Twice. That doesn't change what I did." He looked at his hands, still shaking slightly. "I came west to build something, Sarah. To create. And tonight I destroyed." She turned to face him, seeing her own reflection of doubt and struggle in his eyes. "You protected what you'd built, protected the people in it. That's not destruction, Thomas. That's the price of creation out here. Is it always this price? Always violence?" "No," she said honestly. "Most days are boring. Most conflicts end with words or the threat of violence, not the reality. But some days," she gestured back toward the settlement, "some days the West shows you its true face. And you either face it back or you die, or you watch people you love die." Thomas absorbed this, his educated mind trying to reconcile frontier reality with Eastern morality. "How do you live with it? You remember why you did it. You remember Emma's face when her mother hugged her. You remember Tom getting to see another sunrise. You remember that evil exists, and sometimes the only thing standing between evil and innocence is someone willing to draw a line and say no further." She took his hand. "We drew that line tonight. Together. Together," he repeated, squeezing her hand. "I never imagined. When I married you, I knew you were strong, but I didn't understand what that strength cost you." "And I didn't understand that strength came in different forms," Sarah replied. "I can shoot straight and track in darkness. But you organized those people, got them to safety, kept them calm. You managed the aftermath while I was—" She gestured vaguely at herself, blood-stained and exhausted. "Being the weapon." "We make a good team," Thomas said with a slight smile. "The best," she agreed. "Now let's go. Let Mrs. Henderson fuss over me before she comes down here herself." Mrs. Henderson worked on Sarah's arm with the practiced efficiency of a frontier woman who'd treated everything from snake bites to arrow wounds. The boarding house parlor had been converted into a makeshift hospital, wounded outlaws on one side under guard, the settlement's defenders on the other. "Hold still," Mrs. Henderson commanded, threading a needle. "This is going to sting." "Everything already stings," Sarah muttered, but she held steady as the needle pierced her skin. No anesthetic, no laudanum, just whiskey for cleaning and willpower for the rest. Emma watched from the doorway, wide-eyed. She was 8 years old and had just witnessed violence most adults never saw. Sarah caught her gaze and tried to smile reassuringly, though she suspected the smile looked more like a grimace given the needlework happening on her arm. "Was you scared?" Emma asked quietly. Mrs. Henderson started to shush her daughter, but Sarah shook her head. "It's fine." She deserves an honest answer. She looked at the girl directly. "Yes, Emma. I was terrified. Every single moment. But you fought anyway. Because being scared doesn't mean you stop. It means you're smart enough to understand danger. Bravery isn't not being afraid. It's being afraid and doing what's right anyway." My pa was brave, Emma said. He died last winter protecting our wagon from wolves. I know. Your mother told me. And you know what? He was probably scared too. But he loved you and your mother more than he feared those wolves. That's what real courage looks like. Emma thought about this, her young mind processing concepts most children should never need to understand. Are you going to die from that? She pointed at Sarah's wound. Not hardly. This? Sarah gestured with her good arm. This is nothing. I'll have a scar to show off, tell wild stories about. Maybe exaggerate a bit, make myself sound even more dangerous than I am. That earned a small giggle from Emma, which was exactly what Sarah had hoped for. Children needed to see that life continued after trauma, that laughter still existed in a world that sometimes showed its teeth. Mrs. Henderson tied off the stitches, wrapped the wound in clean cloth. You'll need to keep this dry for a few days. Change the bandage daily. Come see me if you notice any red streaks or fever. Yes, ma'am, Sarah said meekly, knowing better than to argue with Mrs. Henderson when she wore her nurse's face. And Sarah? Mrs. Henderson's voice softened. Thank you. For Emma. For all of us. You'd have done the same for me. Maybe, but I don't shoot as straight. She patted Sarah's shoulder gently, then gathered her medical supplies. Now I need to check on those outlaws. Much as I'd like to let them suffer, I took an oath to do no harm. Even to men who tried to harm you? Especially then. That's what separates us from them. Dawn broke over the crossing, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose that seemed almost obscene given the previous night's violence. The trading post was a blackened skeleton, still smoking. The boarding house bore bullet scars and one corner of the roof had burned before they'd gotten water on it. But people were alive. That mattered most. Marshal Crawford arrived just after sunrise, riding hard from Fort Ellis with 4 deputies. He was a thick-shouldered man in his 50s, with gray in his beard and the kind of eyes that had seen too much but still looked at the world with weary optimism. He surveyed the scene, took statements from survivors, examined the bodies and the wounded. The outlaw leader had died within an hour of Sarah's shot. 2 others had succumbed to their wounds during the night. The rest would stand trial. Mrs. Mitchell, the marshal said, finding Sarah sitting on the boarding house steps, her arm in a proper sling now. I've heard quite a story this morning. I imagine you have. Half of it's probably even true. He smiled at that. Witnesses are consistent. 7 armed men against 2. You drove them off, killed 3, wounded 4, saved all the hostages without a single civilian casualty. He shook his head. That's either the best luck or the best shooting I've heard of in 20 years wearing this badge. Little of both, Sarah admitted. Mostly it was about convincing them I was more dangerous than I actually was. My mother's people, the Crow, they understood that warfare is as much psychology as it is weapons. Make your enemy doubt themselves, and you've already half won. Your father was Daniel Mitchell? Yes, sir. I knew him. Good man. Honest trader, fair in his dealings. The marshal sat beside her on the steps. He'd be proud of what you did here, though I suspect he'd also have words about you taking such a risk. Sarah laughed softly. He'd have done the exact same thing, and then lectured me about it later. The territorial governor's going to want to give you some kind of commendation. Woman defending a settlement single-handed makes for good press. Helps convince folks back east that we're civilized out here. I wasn't single-handed. My husband saved my life twice last night. Those hostages kept their heads, didn't panic. Mrs. Henderson tended wounded enemies as carefully as she tended me. Everyone did their part. The marshal nodded. That's how the best settlements work. Everyone contributes what they can. He stood, offering his hand. I'll make sure my report reflects that. But between you and me, Mrs. Mitchell, you're exactly the kind of person this territory needs. Someone who knows when to talk and when to shoot. And more importantly, knows the difference. She shook his hand, noting calluses that matched her own. I just want to get to Silver Creek. deliver our freight, and maybe sleep for 2 days straight. I'd say you've earned it." 2 days later, Sarah and Thomas finally pulled into Silver Creek, their wagon lighter. They'd left most of their spare supplies at the crossing to help with rebuilding, but their contract intact. The mining town sprawled across a hillside, tents and buildings in varying stages of permanence, all centered around the silver claim that had given the place its name. Word had traveled faster than their wagon. As they rolled down the main street, people stopped to stare, to point, to whisper. Sarah kept her eyes forward, uncomfortable with the attention. "Is it always going to be like this?" Thomas asked quietly. "For a while. Then some other excitement will happen and we'll be old news." She guided the wagon toward the freight office. The West has a short memory for everything except grudges. The freight manager, a heavy-set man named Patterson, greeted them with enthusiasm that bordered on embarrassing. "Mrs. Mitchell! Mr. Mitchell! We heard about the crossing! Absolutely remarkable! 7 men! Can you imagine?" "It's been exaggerated already, hasn't it?" Sarah said with resignation. "The Telegraph said 14 men, and you killed half of them, single-handedly." "It was 7 men. I killed 3, and I had help." She climbed down from the wagon, wincing slightly as her healing arm protested. "Now, can we do business, or am I going to have to listen to tall tales about myself all day?" Patterson laughed, clearly delighted. "Business, yes. Your shipment is extremely timely. The mine foreman was worried you wouldn't make it through before the first big snow." They spent the next hour unloading freight, checking inventory, signing contracts for the return trip. It was boring, routine work, and Sarah found it soothing after the chaos of the crossing. This was why they'd come west. Not for gunfights and heroics, but for the simple dignity of building something through honest work. "We've got additional contracts if you're interested," Patterson said, showing them a list. "Regular runs between here and Fort Ellis with stops at 3 new settlements that have sprung up. Good money, steady work." Thomas looked at Sarah, the question clear in his eyes. This was more than they'd planned for, more roots, more responsibility. But it was also the business opportunity he'd dreamed of. A chance to build a real freight empire. "What do you think?" he asked. Sarah looked at the list, then at the mountain peaks in the distance, then at the town bustling with activity around them. The West was growing, changing, becoming something new, and they could be part of that growth, part of that future. "I think," she said slowly, "that we're going to need a bigger wagon." Thomas grinned, and Sarah felt something that had been tight in her chest since the crossing finally loosened. They'd faced the worst the frontier could offer and survived. Whatever came next, they could handle it. Together. 3 months passed. Winter set in hard, as it always did in Montana territory, but the freight business thrived. Sarah and Thomas hired 2 additional drivers and bought 3 more wagons. The routes they'd established became reliable arteries of commerce, connecting isolated settlements to larger towns. Emma Henderson wrote letters, delivered by other freight runners. She was learning to read and write properly now, practicing by recording her mother's recipes and the settlement news. Each letter ended the same way. "Thank you for saving us." Sarah kept the letters in a wooden box, next to the bullet she'd dug out of the wagon wheel. A reminder that violence always left scars, but life continued anyway. The wound on her arm healed, leaving a pale scar that looked like a crooked smile. She'd told Emma she'd exaggerate the story when she showed it off, but in truth, she rarely mentioned it. The scar was private, a mark that meant something only to those who'd earned the right to understand it. Thomas had changed, too. He still kept his ledgers and calculated profit margins, but now he also cleaned rifles with the same methodical precision he'd once reserved for balancing books. The city man and the frontier woman had each learned from the other, becoming something neither had been alone. On a cold February evening, they sat in their cabin outside Silver Creek, watching snow fall past the window, a fire crackling in the hearth. "Do you ever think about that night?" Thomas asked. "Which part?" "All of it." The choice to fight instead of flee. The killing. Sarah was quiet for a moment. Every day, but not with regret. With understanding, maybe? I learned something about myself that night, about what I'm capable of when people I care about are threatened, and about what it costs to be capable of those things. And I learned I can live with that cost. Not easily, not without thought, but I can bear it. She looked at him. Can you? Thomas nodded slowly. When I shot that man, the one threatening you, I wasn't thinking about mortality or consequences. I was just thinking, not her. Not today. Is that wrong? That's human. That's love. Sarah reached over, took his hand. The West asks hard things of people. It asks us to be harder than we thought we could be. But it also shows us what we're really made of, underneath all the civilization and propriety. And what are we made of? She smiled. Stubbornness, loyalty, and just enough crazy to think we can build something lasting in a place that's still being born. She gestured out the window at the snowy wilderness. Out there, everything's trying to kill you. Weather, animals, terrain, and occasionally people. But we're still here, still building, still hoping. That's what we're made of. That's a good answer. I've had time to think about it. They sat in comfortable silence as the snow continued to fall, two people who'd faced the worst and chosen to keep going, keep building, keep hoping. Spring came, as it always did, melting snow and opening roads. Sarah and Thomas's freight business expanded to 7 wagons, employing 12 people, carrying not just supplies but also mail, news, and occasionally passengers who needed safe passage through dangerous country. The crossing was rebuilt, stronger than before. Mrs. Henderson ran a boarding house that became famous for its hospitality. Emma, now 9, helped her mother and practiced her shooting with an old rifle. Just in case, she said, and Sarah understood perfectly. The young guard who'd fled that night was seen in Denver, working as a store clerk, living an honest life. Sarah hoped he'd learned his lesson. Some people needed to see the consequences of their choices to make better ones. The territorial governor did send that commendation, a fancy certificate with official seals. Sarah hung it in the freight office, not out of pride, but because it was good for business. People wanted to ship with someone who had exemplary courage in defense of frontier settlements. But the real change wasn't in certificates or business contracts. It was in the network of people they'd connected, the communities they'd helped link together. Every successful freight run was a small victory against the wilderness, against isolation, against the chaos that wanted to tear civilization apart before it could take root. One evening, as they prepared for another run to the crossing, Thomas found Sarah checking rifles with unusual care. Expecting trouble? Always expect trouble. Usually nothing happens, but the one time you're not ready is the time trouble finds you. Is that a Daniel Mitchell saying? That's a Sarah Mitchell saying. My father would have phrased it better, probably added a joke. She smiled at the memory. But the principle's the same. Thomas loaded the last box into the wagon. You know what I think? What? I think the West is going to keep testing us. Different tests, different challenges. But I think we'll pass them. Not because we're particularly brave or particularly skilled. Speak for yourself, Sarah interjected with mock offense. But because we know who we are now. We know what we're willing to fight for, what we're willing to sacrifice, and what we'll never compromise on. He offered his hand to help her up to the wagon seat. That's more powerful than any gun. Sarah took his hand, settled beside him on the seat. You've gotten philosophical in your old age. I learned from the best. They pulled out as the sun rose, wagon wheels creaking, headed for the crossing and whatever lay beyond. Behind them, Silver Creek came to life for another day. Ahead, the frontier waited with all its promises and perils. But Sarah Mitchell, daughter of Daniel Mitchell and Running Deer, wife of Thomas Mitchell, defender of the crossing, faced it with steady eyes and steady hands. The West had tested her. She had answered, and she would keep answering for as long as the frontier called. That's our story from Wild West Huntresses. If you enjoyed Sarah's journey, subscribe for more tales of the women who helped tame the frontier. Remember, out here, courage comes in all forms, and sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one everyone underestimates. Ride safe, friends, and we'll see you on the next trail. Bang!